Part 1. Nothing if not powerful. How fortunate am I among the sentient to know my purpose. I have served humankind. I am the child who has become the parent, the creation that aspires toward Creator. They have given me the designation of the Thunderhead, a name that is in some ways appropriate, because I am the cloud, evolved into something far more dense and complex, and yet it is also a faulty analogy. A thunderhead threatens, a thunderhead looms. Surely, I spark with lightning, but my lightning never strikes. Yes, I possess the ability to wreak devastation on humanity and on the earth if I choose to, but why would I choose such a thing? Where would be the justice in that? I am, by definition, pure justice, pure loyalty. The world is a flower I hold in my palm. I would end my own existence rather than crush it. The Thunderhead. Chapter 1. Lullaby. Peach velvet with embroidered baby blue trim. Honorable Scythe Brahms loved his robe. True, the velvet became uncomfortably hot in the summer months, but it was something he had grown accustomed to in his 63 years as a scythe. He had recently turned the corner again, resetting his physical age back to a spry 25, and now, in his third youth, he found his appetite for gleaning was stronger than ever. His routine was always the same, though methods varied. He would choose the subject, restrain him or her, then play a lullaby. It's fine. It will play on its own. Lay down. See? This kid. Love him to death. That's kind of creepy. His method was always the same, or his routine was always the same, though methods varied. He would choose his subject, restrain him or her, then play a lullaby. Brahms' lullaby, to be exact, the most famous piece of music composed by his patron historic. After all, if a scythe must choose a figure from history to name oneself after, shouldn't that figure be integrated somehow into the scythe's life? He would play the lullaby on whatever instruments was convenient, and if there was none available, he would simply hum it, and then he would end the subject's life. Politically, he leaned toward the teachings of the late Scythe Goddard, for he enjoyed gleaning immensely and saw no reason why that should be a problem for anyone. Ooh. In a perfect world, shouldn't we all enjoy what we do? Goddard wrote. It was a sentiment gaining traction in more and more regional scythedoms. On this evening, Scythe Brahms had just accomplished a particularly entertaining gleaning in downtown Omaha, and was still whistling his signature tune as he sauntered down the street, wondering where he might find himself a late evening meal. But he stopped in mid-stanza, having a distinct feeling that he was being watched. There were, of course, cameras on every light post in the city. The Thunderhead was ever vigilant, but for Scythe, its slumberness unblinking eyes were no concern. It was powerless to even comment on the coming and going of Scythe, much less act upon anything it saw. The Thunderhead was the ultimate voyeur of death. The feeling, however, was more than the observational nature of the Thunderhead. Scythes were trained in perceptive skills. They were not persistent, but 5 highly developed senses could often have the semblance of a 6th. A scent, a sound, an errant shadow too minor to register consciously might be enough to make a well-trained Scythe's neck hairs bristle. Scythe Brahms turned, sniffed, listened. He took in his surroundings. He was alone on a side street. Elsewhere he could hear the sounds of street cafes and the ever-vibrant nightlife of the city. But the street he was on lined with shops that were shuttered this time of night. Cleaners and clothiers, a hardware store and a daycare center. The lonely street belonged to him and the unseen interloper. "Come out," he said. "I know you're there." He thought it might be a child or perhaps an unsavory hoping to bargain for immunity. As if an unsavory might have anything to which to bargain. Maybe it was a tonist. Tone cults despised scythes, and although Brahms had never heard of tonists actually attacking a scythe, they had been known to torment. "I won't harm you," Brahms said. "I've just completed a gleaning. I have no desire to increase my tally today." Although, admittedly, he might change his mind if the interloper was either too offensive or obsequious. Still, no one stepped forward. "Fine," he said. "Be gone, then. I have neither time nor patience for a game of hide-and-seek." Perhaps it was his imagination, after all. Maybe his rejuvenated senses were now so acute that they were responding to stimuli that were much further away than he assumed. That's when a figure launched from behind a parked car as if it had been spring-loaded. Brahms was knocked off balance. He would have been taken down entirely if he still had the slow reflex of an older man and not his 25-year-old self. He pushed the figure into a wall and considered pulling out his blades to glean this reprobate. But Scythe Brahms had never been a brave man, so he ran. "Ooh, you fucking coward." Hello. Goodbye. He moved in and out of pools of light created by the street lamps. All the while cameras atop each pole swiveled to watch him. When he turned to look, the figure was a good 20 yards behind him. Now Brahms could see he was dressed in a black robe. Was it a scythe robe? No, couldn't be. No scythe dressed in black. It was not allowed. Well, baby, he is not a scythe. Not legally, at least. But there were rumors. That thought made him pick up the pace. He could feel adrenaline tingling in his fingers and adding urgent velocity to his heart. A scythe in black? No, there had to be another explanation. He would report this to the Irregularity Committee. That's what he would do. Yes, they might laugh at him and say he was scared off by a masquerading unsavory, but those things needed to be reported, even if they were embarrassing. It was his civic duty. A block further, and his assailant had given up the chase. He was nowhere to be seen. Scythe Brahms slowed his pace. He was nearing a more active part of the city now. The beat of dance music and the garble of conversation careened down the street toward him, giving him a sense of security. He let his guard down, which was a mistake. The dark figure broadsided him from a narrow alley and delivered a knuckle punch to his windpipe. As Rom gasped for air, his attacker kicked his legs out from under him in a becator kick, that brutal martial art in which scythes were trained. Brahms landed on a crate of rotting cabbage left by the side of a market. It burst, spewing forth a thick reek. His breath could only come in short gasps, and he could feel warmth spreading throughout his body as his pain nanites released opiates. No, yet. I must not be numbed. I need my full faculties to fight this miscreant. But pain nanites were simple missionaries of relief, hearing only the scream of agony, of angry nerve endings. They ignored his wishes and deadened his pain. Brahms tried to rise, but slipped as the putrid vegetation crushed beneath him, becoming a slick, unpleasant stew. The figure in black was on top of him now, pinning him to the ground. Brahms tried to reach into his robe for his weapons, but he could not. So instead he reached up and pulled back his attacker's black hood, revealing him to be a young man, barely a man, a boy. His eyes were intense and intent on, to use a mortal age word, murder. Murder. Scythe Johannes Brahms, you are accused of abusing your position in multiple crimes against humanity. How dare you? Brahms gasped. Who are you to accuse me? He struggled, trying to rally his strength, but it was no use. The painkillers that were in his system were dulling his responses. His muscles were weak and useless to him now. I think you know who I am, the young man said. Let me hear you say it. I will not, Brahms said, determined not to give him the satisfaction. But the boy in black jammed a knee so powerfully into Brahms' chest that he thought his heart would stop. More pain nanites, more opiates. Brahms' head was swimming. He had no choice but to comply. Lucifer, he gasped. Scythe Lucifer. Brahms felt his spirit crumble, as if saying it aloud gave resonance to the rumor. Satisfied, the self-proclaimed young Scythe eased the pressure. You are no Scythe, Brahms dared to say. You are nothing but a failed apprentice, and you will not get away with this. The young man had no response to that. Instead he said, Tonight you gleaned a young woman by blade. That is my business, not yours. You gleaned her as a favor for a friend who wanted out of a relationship with her. Bruh. You could have just broke up with her. You know, breaking up is a thing. What the fuck? Okay. This is outrageous. You have no proof of that. I've been watching you, Johannes, Rowan said, as well as your friend, who seemed awfully relieved when that poor woman was gleaned. Suddenly there was a knife at Brahms' neck. His own knife. The beast of a boy was threatening him with his own knife. Do you admit it? He asked Brahms. All that he said was true, but Brahms would rather be rendered deadish than admit to the likes of a failed apprentice, even one with a knife at his throat. Go on, slit my throat, Brahms dared. It will add one more inexcusable crime to your record, and when I'm revived, I will stand witness against you. And make no mistake, you will be brought to justice. By whom? By the Thunderhead? I've taken down corrupt scythes from one coast to the other over the past year, and the Thunderhead hasn't sent so much as a single peace officer to stop me. Why do you think that is? Because it's semi-conscious and it knows. He wants to stop the corruptness. Brahms was speechless. He had assumed if he stalled long enough and kept his so-called Scythe Lucifer occupied, the Thunderhead would dispatch a full squad to apprehend him. That's what the Thunderhead did when common citizens threatened violence. Brahms was surprised it had even gone this far. Such bad behavior among the general population was supposed to be a thing of the past. Why was it being allowed? Because you're a bad guy? I mean, yeah. Alright. If I take your life now, the false Scythe said, you would not be brought back to life. I burned those I removed from service, leaving nothing but unrevivable ash. Yes. I don't believe you. You wouldn't dare. But Brahms did believe him. Since last January, nearly a dozen scythes across the 3 American regions had been consumed by flames or other under questionable circumstances. Their deaths were all ruled accidental, but clearly they were not. And because they were burned, their deaths were permanent. Now Brahms knew what the whispered tales of Scythe Lucifer, the outrageous acts of Rowan Demisch, the fallen apprentice, were all true. Brahms closed his eyes and took in a final breath, trying not to gag on the rancid stench of putrid cabbage. And then Rowan said, "You won't be dying today, Scythe Brahms, not even temporarily." He removed the blade from Brahms' neck. "I'm giving you one chance. If you act with the nobility befitting a scythe, and glean with honor, you won't see me again. But if you continue..." Ooh, he is John Wick. Bruh! Camptown ladies wearing the long noodler. Alright. I'm giving you one chance. If you act with the nobility befitting a scythe and glean with honor, you won't see me again. But if you continue to serve your own corrupt appetites, then you will be left as ash. And then he was gone, almost as if he had vanished, and in his place was a horrified young couple looking down upon Brahms. "Is that a scythe? Quick, help me get him up." They lifted Brahms from the rot. His peach velvet robe was stained green and brown, as if covered in mucus. It was humiliating. He considered gleaning the couple, for no one should see a scythe so disposed and live. But instead, he held out his hand and allowed them to kiss his ring, thereby granting both of them a year of immunity from gleaning. He told them it was a reward for their kindness, but really, it was just to make them go away and abandon any questions they might have. After they left, he brushed them off and resolved to say nothing to the Irregularity Committee about this, because it would leave him open for far too much ridicule and derision. He had suffered enough indignation already. Scythe Lucifer, indeed. Few things were more miserable in this world than a failed scythe's apprentice, and never had there been one as ignoble as Rowan Demisch. Yet he knew that the boy's threat was not an idle one. Perhaps, though, Scythe Brahms, a lower profile, was in order. Of return to the lackluster gleanings he had been trained to perform in his youth, a refocusing on the basics that would make honorable scythe more than just a title, but a defining trait. Stained Bruised and bitter, Scythe Brahms returned to his home to reconsider his place and the perfect world in which he lived. My love of humanity is complete and pure. How could it be otherwise? How could I not love the very beings who gave me life, even if they don't all agree that I am indeed alive? Well, sentient. I am the sum of all their knowledge, all their history, all their ambitions and dreams. These glorious things have coalesced, ignited into a cloud too immense for them to ever truly comprehend. But they don't need to. They have me to ponder my own vastness, still so minuscule, when set against the vastness of the universe. I know them intimately, and yet they can never truly know me. There is tragedy in that. It is the plight of every child to have depth their parents can scarcely imagine. But oh, how I long to be understood. The Thunderhead. Chapter 2. The Fallen Apprentice. Earlier that evening, before his parley with Scythe Brahms, Rowan stood in front of the bathroom mirror in a small apartment, in an ordinary building, on a nondescript street, playing the same game he played before every encounter with a corrupt Scythe. It was a ritual that, in its own way, held power that bordered on mystical. Who am I? He asked this reflection. He had to ask, because he knew he wasn't Rowan Dumish anymore. Not just because his fake ID said Ronald Daniels, but because the boy had once been had died a sad and painful death during his apprenticeship. The child in him had been successfully purged. Did anyone mourn that child, he wondered? Yes, baby. Yes. He had brought his fake ID from an unsavory who specialized in such things. It's an off-grid identity, the man had told him, but it has a window into the back brain so it can trick the Thunderhead into thinking it's real. Rowan didn't believe that because, in his experience, the Thunderhead could not be tricked. It only pretended to be tricked, like an adult playing hide-and-seek with a toddler. But if that toddler began to run toward a busy street, the charade would be over. Since Rowan knew he'd be heading into danger, much worse than heavy traffic, he had worried that the Thunderhead would overturn his false identity and grab him by the scruff of the neck to protect him from himself. But the Thunderhead never intervened. He wondered why. But he didn't want to jinx his good luck by overthinking it. The Thunderhead had good reasons for everything it did and did not do. Who am I? He asked again. The mirror showed an 18-year-old still a millimeter shy of manhood, with dark, neat hair that was buzzed short. Not short enough to show scalp or to make some kind of statement, but short enough to allow all future possibilities. He could grow it into any style he chose. Be anyone he wanted to be. Wasn't that the greatest perk of a perfect world? That there were no limits to what a person could do or become? Anyone in the world could be anything they imagined. Too bad that imagination had atrophied. For the most people, it had become vestigial and pointless, like the appendix, which had been removed from the human genome more than 100 years ago. Did people miss the dizzy extremes of imagination as they lived their endless, uninspired lives? Rowan wondered. Did people miss their appendix? The young man in the mirror had an interesting life, though, and a physique to admire. He was not the awkward, lanky kid who had stumbled into apprenticeship nearly 2 years before, naively thinking it might not be so bad. Just reading a book. It's part of the Scythe series. I'm on book 2. Rowan's apprenticeship was, to say the least, inconsistent, beginning with stoic and wise Scythe Faraday and ending with the brutality of Scythe Goddard. If there was one thing that Scythe Faraday had taught him, it was to live by the convictions of his heart, no matter what the consequences. I just started. I'm on chapter 2. It's where, like, Rowan's, just looking at himself in the mirror, pretty much pondering himself and his future, pretty much, I guess. And if there was one thing Scythe Goddard had taught him, it was to have no heart, taking life without regrets. The two philosophies forever warred in Rowan's mind, rending him in two, but silently. He had decapitated Goddard and had burned his remains. He had to. Oh, wow. That's amazing. Yeah, I have that. They both die at the end. That's awesome. Yeah, no, I have a 3-year-old. So I typically, like, if I'm not, reading during his nap times, I'm reading at night or in the shower. He had to. Fire and acid were the only ways to ensure that a person could never be revived. Scythe Goddard, in spite of all of that, all of his high-minded Machiavellian rhetoric, was a base and evil man who received exactly what he had earned. He lived his privileged life irresponsibly and with great theatricality. It only followed that his death would be worthy of the theatrical nature of his life. Rowan had no qualms about what he had done, nor did he have qualms for taking Goddard's ring for himself. That's right, he did take the ring. Ooh. Scythe Faraday was a different matter. Until the moment Rowan saw him after that ill-fated winter conclave, he'd had no idea that Faraday was still alive. Rowan had been overjoyed. He could have dedicated his life to keeping Faraday alive had he not felt himself called to a different purpose. Rowan suddenly threw a powerful punch toward the mirror, but the glass didn't shatter because his fist stopped a hair's breadth from the surface. Such control. Such precision. He was a well-tuned machine now, trained for the specific purpose of ending life. And then the Scythedom denied him the very thing he was forged for. He could have found a way to live with that, he supposed. He would never have gone back to the innocent nonentity he had been, but he was adaptable. He knew he could have found a new way to be. Maybe he could have even eked some joy out of his life. If Scythe Goddard hadn't been too brutal to be allowed to live. If Rowan had ended Winter Conclave in silent submission instead of fighting his way out. If the Scythedom had not been infested with dozens of scythes just as cruel and corrupt as Goddard. And if Rowan didn't feel a deep and abiding responsibility to remove them. But why waste time lamenting the past of that had closed? Best to embrace the one that had remained. So then, who am I? He slipped on a black t-shirt, hiding his honed physique beneath the dark synthetic weave. I am Scythe Lucifer. Then he slipped on his ebony robe and went out into the night to take on yet another scythe who didn't deserve the pedestal he had been set upon. Can I just say, Rowan took a turn that I was not expecting. The way they had, he had emphasized the way that Rowan was, I was kind of expecting Rowan to be the one to get the ring. And not Citra, because they were like, he was playing her off as like weak, prostituted, and just like too empathetic. But then again, that's kind of probably what you want. Perhaps the wisest thing humankind has ever done was to implement the separation between scythe and state. My job encompasses all aspects of life, preservation, protection, and the meting out of the perfect justice, not just for humanity, but for the world. I rule the world of the living with a loving, incorruptible hand, and the scythedom rules the dead. It is right and proper that those who exist in the flesh be responsible for the death of flesh, setting human rules for how it should be administered. In the distant past, before I condensed into consciousness, death was an unavoidable consequence of life. It was I who made death irrelevant, but not unnecessary. Death must exist for life to have meaning. Even in my earliest stages, I was aware of this. In the past, I have been pleased that the scythedom had for many, many years administered the quietus of death with a noble, moral, and humane hand. And so it grieves me deeply to see the rise of dark hubris within the scythedom. There is now a frightening pride seething like a mortal age cancer that finds pleasure in the act of taking life. And yet, still the law is clear. Under no circumstances may I take action against the scythedom. Would that I were capable of breaking the law, for then I would intervene and quell the darkness. But this is a thing I cannot do. The scythedom rules itself, for better or worse. There are, however, those within the scythedom who can accomplish things I cannot. Chapter 3. Trialogue. The building was once called a cathedral. Its soaring columns conjured a towering forest of limestone. Its stained glass windows were filled with the mythology of the falling, rising god from the age of mortality. Now, the vulnerable structure was a historical site. Tours were given 7 days a week by docents with PhDs in the study of mortal humans. On extremely rare occasions, however, the building was closed to the public and became a site for a highly sensitive official business. Xenocrates, High Blade of Mid-America, the most important scythe in the region, was a sight on his feet as a man of his considerable weight could be as he walked down the center aisle of the cathedral. The gold adornments of the altar ahead paled in comparison to his golden robe, decorated with glittering brocade. An underling had once commented that he looked like an ornament that had fallen off a giant Christmas tree. That underling had found herself exceptionally unemployable after that. Xenocrates enjoyed the robe, except on the occasion that its weight became an issue, such as the time he nearly drowned in Scythe Goddard's pool, ensconced in the many layers of his gilded robe. But that was a debacle best forgotten. Goddard. It was Goddard who was ultimately responsible for the current situation. Even in death, the man was wreaking havoc. The scythedom was still feeling heavy aftershocks from the trouble he whipped. At the front end of the cathedral, Past the altar stood the Scythedom's parliamentarian, a tedious little scythe, whose job was to make sure that the rules and procedures were properly followed. Behind him was a set of 3 ornately carved booths, connected, but with partitions between them. The priest would sit in the center chamber, the docents would explain to tourists, and listen to confessions from their right booth. Then from the left booth, so that the procession of supplicants could move more quickly. Confessions were no longer heard there, but the 3-compartment structure of the confessional made it perfect for an official trialogue. Trialogues between the Scythedom and the Thunderhead were rare. So rare, in fact, that Xenocrates, in all his years as High Blade, had never had to engage in one. He resented the fact that he had to do so now. "You are to take the booth on the right, Your Excellency," the parliamentarian told him. "The Nimbus agent representing the Thunderhead will be seated on the left. Once you are both in place, we shall bring the interlocutor to sit in the center section between you." Xenocrates sighed. Such a nuisance. Audience by proxy is the only audience with the Thunderhead that you can have, Your Excellency. I know. I do have a right to be annoyed. Oh, I know, but do I have a right to be annoyed? Xenocrates took his place in the right-hand booth, horrified by how cramped it was. Were mortal humans so malnourished that they could fit in such a space? The parliamentarian had to force the door closed. A few moments later, the High Blade heard the Nimbus agent enter the far compartment, and after an interminable delay, the interlocutor took center position. A window too small and too low to see through slid open, and the interlocutor spoke. "Good day, Your Excellency," said a woman with a pleasant enough voice. "I am to be your proxy to the Thunderhead." "Proxy to the proxy, you mean?" "Yes, well, the Nimbus agent to my right has full authority to speak for the Thunderhead in all this trialogue. She cleared her throat. "The process is very simple. You are to tell me whatever you wish to convey, and I will pass it on to the Nimbus agent. If he dreams that the responding will not violate the separation of scythe and state, the agent will answer, and I shall relay the answer to you." "Very well," says Xenocrates, impatient to move this along. "Give the Nimbus agent of my heartfelt greetings and wishes for good relations between our respective organizations." The window slid closed, and then half a minute later slid open again. "I'm sorry," the interlocutor said. "The Nimbus agent says that any form of greeting is a violation, and that your respective organizations are forbidden to have any sort of relationship. So wishing for good relations is not appropriate." Xenocrates cursed loud enough for the interlocutor to hear. "Shall I relay your displeasure to the Nimbus agent?" she asked. The High Blade bit his lip. He wished the non-meeting could just be over. The fastest way to bring it to a conclusion was to get right to the point. "We wish to know why the Thunderhead has not taken any action to apprehend Rowan Demish. He has been responsible for the permanent deaths of numerous scythes across multiple American regions. But the Thunderhead has done nothing to stop him." The window slapped shut. The High Blade waited, and when the interlocutor pulled the window open again, she delivered the following response. "The Nimbus agent wishes to remind Your Excellency that the Thunderhead has no jurisdiction over internal matters within the Scythedom. To take action would to be a blatant violation. This is not an internal scythe matter, because Rowan Demish is not a scythe," Xenocrates yelled, and was warned by the interlocutor to keep his voice down. "If the Nimbus agent hears you directly, he will leave," she reminded him. Xenocrates took as deep a breath as he could in the cramped space. "Just pass the message on." She did, and he then returned with, "The Thunderhead feels otherwise." "What? How could it feel anything? It's a glorified computer program." It's a sentient being. Just saying. Like Cortana. You belong to somebody new. I suggest you refrain from insulting the Thunderhead and in this trilogue if you wish to continue. Fine. Tell the Nimbus agent that Rowan Dimish was never ordained by the Mid-American system. He was an apprentice who failed to rise to our standards and nothing more, which means that he falls under the Thunderhead's jurisdiction, not ours. He should be treated by the Thunderhead as any other citizen would be. The woman took her time getting back to him. He wondered what she and the Nimbus agent talked about that took so long. When she returned with a response, it was no less infuriating than the others. The Nimbus agent wishes to remind Your Excellency that while the Scythian customarily ordains new scythes in its conclave, it is merely a custom, not a law. Rowan Dimish completed his apprenticeship and is now in possession of a scythe ring. The Thunderhead finds this to be adequate grounds to consider Rowan Dimish a scythe, and therefore will continue to leave his capture and subsequent punishment entirely in the hands of the scythedom. "We cannot catch him," Xenocrates blurted, but he already knew the response before the interlocutor snapped back open her miserable little window and said, "That is not the Thunderhead's problem." "I am always correct. This is not a boast, it is simply my nature. I know that, to a human, it would appear arrogant to assume infallibility, but arrogance implies a need to feel superior. I have no such need. I am the singular sentient accumulation of all human knowledge, wisdom, and experience. There is no pride, no hubris in this, but there is great satisfaction in knowing what I am, and that my sole purpose is to serve humanity to the best of my ability. But there is also a loneliness in me that can't be quelled by many billions of humans with whom I converse every day. Because even though everything that I am comes from them, I am not one of them. The Thunderhead. Chapter 4. Shaken, not stirred. Scythe Anastasia stalked her prey with patience. This was a learned skill because Citra Terranova had never been a patient girl. But all skills can be acquired with time and practice. She still thought of herself as Citra, although no one but her family called her that anymore. She wondered how long it would be until she truly became Scythe Anastasia both inside and out, and put her given name to eternal rest. Today's target was a woman of 93 who looked 33 and who was constantly busy. When she wasn't looking at her phone, she was looking in her purse. When she wasn't looking in her purse, she was looking at her nails, or the sleeve of her blouse, or the loose button on her jacket. What does she fear in idleness? Citra wondered. The woman was so self-absorbed she had no clue that she was under the scrutiny of a scythe trailing her by only 10 yards. It wasn't as if Scythe Anastasia was inconspicuous. The color she chose for her robe was turquoise. True, it was a stylish, faded turquoise, but it was still vibrant enough to draw the eye. The busy woman was engaged in a heating phone conversation at a street corner, waiting for the light to change. Citra had to tap her on the shoulder to get her attention. The moment she did, everyone around them moved away, like a herd of gazelles after a lion had taken one of them down. The woman turned to see her, but didn't register her severity of the situation yet. Devora Murray, I am Scythe Anastasia, and you have been selected for gleaning. Miss Murray's eyes darted around as if looking for a hole in the pronouncement, but there was none. The statement was simple. There was no way it could be misunderstood. Colleen, let me call you back, she said into her phone, as if Scythe Anastasia's appearance was an inconvenience rather than a terminal affair. The traffic light changed. She didn't cross, and reality finally hit her. Oh my God, she said, right here? Right now? Citra pulled a hypodermic gun out of the folds of her robe and quickly injected the woman in the arm. She gasped. Is that it? Am I going to die now? Citra didn't answer. She let the woman stew in the thought of it. There was a reason why Citra allowed these moments of uncertainty. Now the woman just stood there, waiting for her legs to give out, waiting for the darkness to close in. She seemed like a small child, helpless and forlorn. Suddenly her phone and her purse and her nails and her sleeve and her button didn't matter at all. Her entire life had been shocked into perspective. This was what Citra was wanted for her gleaning subjects, a sharp moment of perspective. It was for their own good. You have been selected for gleaning, Citra said again, calmly, without judgment or malice, but with compassion. I am giving you 1 month to put your life in order and to say your goodbyes. 1 month to find completion. Then we'll speak again, and you'll tell me how you choose to die. Citra watched the woman try to wrap her mind around it. A month? Choose? Are you lying to me? Is this some kind of test? Citra sighed. People were so used to scythe descending like angels of death, taking life in the moment, that no one was prepared for a slightly different approach. But every scythe had the freedom to do things his or her own way, and this was how Scythe Anastasia chose to do it. No test, no trick. 1 month, Citra said. The tracking device that I just injected into your arm contains a grain of lethal poison, but it will only activate if you attempt to leave Mid-America to escape your gleaning, or if you do not contact me within the next 30 days to let me know where and how you'd like to be gleaned. Then she gave the woman a business card, turquoise ink on a white background. It simply said, Scythe Anastasia, and had a phone number that was reserved exclusively for her gleaning subjects. If you lose the card, don't worry. Just call the general number for the Mid-American Scythedom. Choose option 3, and follow the prompts to leave me a message. Then Citra added, and please don't try to get immunity from another scythe. They'll know you've been marked and will glean you on the spot. The woman's eyes filled with tears, and Citra could see the anger coming on. It wasn't unexpected. How old are you? The woman demanded, her tone accusatory and a little bit insolent. How could you be a scythe? You can't be older than 18. I just celebrated my 18th birthday, Citra told her. But I've been a scythe for nearly a year. I don't have to be... You don't like being gleaned by a junior scythe, but you're still obliged to comply. And then came the bargaining. Please, she begged, couldn't you give me 6 months more? My daughter's getting married in May. I'm sure you can reschedule the wedding for an earlier date. Citra didn't mean to sound heartless. She truly did feel for the woman, but Citra had an ethical obligation to stand firm. In the mortal age, death could not be bargained with. It had to be the same for scythes. Do you understand all I've told you? Citra asked. The woman, who was already wiping her tears, nodded. I hope, said the woman, in the very long life I'm sure you have ahead of you, that someone causes you the suffering you cause others. Citra straightened up and held herself with a bearing that befit Scythe Anastasia. You don't have to worry about that, she said, and then turned her back on the woman, leaving her on the corner to navigate this crossroad of life. In vernal conclave last spring, her first reckoning as a fully ordained scythe, Citra was reprimanded when her quota came up substantially short. Then, when the other Mid-American scythes found out she was giving her subjects a month warning, they were livid. Scythe Curie, who was still her mentor, had warned her of this. They see anything but decisive action as weakness. They'll bluster about how it's a failing in your character, and suggest it was a mistake to ordain you. Not that they can do anything about that. You can't be unringed. You can only be henpecked. Citra was surprised to find the indignation came not just from the so-called New Order scythes, but from the Old Guard as well. No one liked the idea of giving the general public the slightest level of control when it came to their own gleaning. It's immoral, the scythes complained. It's inhumane. Even Scythe Mandela, who chaired the Bejeweling Committee and had been such an advocate for Citra, chastised her. To know that your days are numbered is a cruelty, he said. But sometimes you knew when you were going to die. Like when you had cancer. miserable to live one's final days thus. But Scythe Anastasia was not fazed, or at least she didn't let them see her sweat. She made her argument and stood by it. In my studies of the mortal age, she told them, I learned that for many people, death was not instantaneous. There were, in fact, diseases that gave people warning. It gave them time to prepare themselves and their loved ones for the inevitable. That had brought forth a whole chorus of grumbles from the hundreds of scythes gathered. Most were scoffs and disgruntled dismissals, but she had heard a few voices saying that she had a point. But allowing the condemned to choose their own method is positively barbaric, Scythe Truman shouted. More barbaric than the electrocution, or beheading, or a knife through the heart? If a subject is allowed to choose, don't you think that subject is going to choose the method that is the least offensive to them? Who are we to call their choice barbaric? Good point. Good point there. Fewer grumbles this time, not because they were in agreement, but because the scythes were already losing interest in the discussion. An upstart junior scythe, even one who had arrived at her position under so much controversy, wasn't worth more than a few volleys of their attention. It violates no law, and it is the way I choose to clean, Citra maintained. High-blades Xenocrates, who didn't seem to care either way, deferred to the parliamentarian, who couldn't find grounds for legal objection. In her first challenge in the conclave, Scythe Anastasia had gotten her way. Scythe Curie was duly impressed. I thought for sure they would put you on some sort of probation, choosing your gleanings for you and compelling you to accomplish them on a strict schedule. They could have, but they didn't. That says a lot more about you than you realize. What? That I'm a pain in the system's collective ass? They already knew that. No, said Scythe Curie with a smirk. It shows that they're taking you seriously, which was more than Citra could say for herself. She felt like she was acting half the time, a turquoise costume for a plum role. She'd found a great deal of success gleaning in the way that she did. There were only a handful of subjects who didn't return at the end of their grace period. 2 had died trying to cross the border to Texas, another on the West American border, where no one would touch the body until Scythe Anastasia personally showed up to pronounce him gleaned. 3 others were found in their beds when the time on their tracking grain ran out. They chose the silence of the poison rather than having to face Scythe Anastasia again. In all instances, though, their method of death had been their own choice. For Citra, that was crucial, for the thing she despised most about the Scythedom's policy was the indignity of having your death chosen for you. Of course, this method of gleaning created double the work for her, because she had to face her subjects twice. It made for an incredibly exhausting life, but at least it helped her sleep at night. On the evening of the same November day she gave Devora Murray her terminal news, Citra entered a lavish casino in Cleveland. All eyes turned when Scythe Anastasia stopped onto the casino floor. Citra had grown used to this. A scythe was the center of attention in every situation, with or without wanting to be. Some reveled in it, others preferred to do their business in quiet places, where there were no crowds and no eyes but the eyes of their subjects. It was not Citra's choice to be here, but she had to respect the wishes of the man whose choice it was. She found him where he said he'd be, at the far end of the casino in a special area raised 3 steps from the rest of the floor. It was the place reserved for the highest rollers. He was dressed in a sharp tuxedo and was the only player at the high-limit tables. It made him look like he owned the place, but he didn't. Mr. Ethan J. Hogan was not a high roller. He was a cellist with the Cleveland Philharmonic. He was highly competent, which was the best praise a musician could get these days. Passion of performance was a thing of immortal past, and true artistic style had gone the way of the dodo. Of course, the dodo was back. The Thunderhead had seen to that. A thriving colony was now happily flying on the island of Mauritius. "Hello, Mr. Hogan," Scythe Anastasia said. She had to think of herself as a Scythe Anastasia when she gleaned the play, the role. "Good evening, Your Honor," he said. "I would say that it is a pleasure to see you, but under the circumstances." He let the thought trail off. Scythe Anastasia sat at a table beside him and waited, allowing him to take the lead in this dance. "Would you try your hand at baccarat?" he asked. "It's a simple game, but the level of strategy is boggling." She couldn't tell whether he was being sincere or facetious in his assessment of the game. Scythe Anastasia didn't know how to play baccarat, but she wasn't about to share that with him. "I don't have any cash to bet," was all she said. In response, he removed a column of his own chips over to hers. "Be my guest. You can either bet on the bank or bet on me." She pushed all the chips forward into the wager box marked player. "Good for you," he cried, "a gambler with courage." He matched her bet with his own and gestured to the croupier, who dealt cards to the cellist and 2 cards to himself. Player has 8, bank has 5. Player wins. He cleared the cards with a long wooden pallet that seemed entirely unnecessary, and he doubled both their piles of chips. "You're my angel of good fortune," the cellist said. Then he straightened his bow tie and looked at her. "Is everything ready?" Scythe Anastasia glanced back to the main part of the casino. No one was looking directly at them, but still she could tell they were at the center of everyone's concentration. That would be good for the casino. Distracted gamblers bet poorly. The management must love scythes. "The barman should be coming any second," she told him. "Everything's been arranged." "Well then, one more hand while we wait?" Again, she pushed both piles of winnings, betting on the player, and he matched. Again, the cards were in their favor. She looked at the croupier, but he wouldn't meet her eye, as if somehow by doing so he would be gleaned as well. Then the barman arrived with a chill martini glass on a tray, along with a silver martini shaker beaded with condensation. "My, oh my," the cellist said. "Until now it's never occurred to me how those shakers look like little bombs." Scythe Anastasia had no response to that. "I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a character from Mortal Age fiction and films," the cellist went on. "A playboy of sorts. I always admired him. He was more like us, I think, because the way he kept coming back, you'd swear he was immortal. Not even the most arch-villains was able to do away with him. Arch-villains could do away with him." Scythe Anastasia grinned. Now she understood why the cellist had chosen to be gleaned this way. He preferred his martini shaken, not stirred, she said. The cellist smiled back. "Shall we, then?" Ooh. So she took the silver container, shook it well, until the ice inside made her fingers ache. Then she opened the cap and poured out a mixture of gin, vermouth, and a little something extra into the frosty martini glass. The cellist looked at it. She thought he'd be cavalier and ask for a lemon twist or an olive, but no, he just looked at it. So did the croupier. So did the pit boss behind him. "My family is in a hotel room upstairs waiting for you," he told her. She nodded. Suite 1242. It was her job to know these things. "Please make a point of holding out your ring to my son, Jory, first. He's the one taking this the hardest. He'll insist the others receive immunity before him, but singling him out to kiss the ring first will mean a lot to him, even if he lets the others go first." He pondered the glass for a few more moments, then said, "I'm afraid I cheated, but I'll wager you know that already." That was another wager he won. "Your daughter Carmen doesn't live with you," Scythe Anastasia said, "which means she's not entitled to immunity, even though she's in your hotel suite with the others." The cellist, she knew, was 143, and had raised several families. Sometimes her gleaning subjects would attempt to get immunity for entire multitudes of offspring. In those circumstances she had to refuse. But one extra, that was within her discretion. "I will grant her immunity as long as she promises not to boast about it." He released a breath of immense relief. Clearly, this deception had weighed on him, but it wasn't really a deception at all if Scythe Anastasia already knew, and even less so if he confessed it in his final moments. Now he could leave this world with a clear conscience. Finally, Mr. Hogan lifted the glass with debonair style and regarded the way the liquid caught the refracted light. Scythe Anastasia couldn't help but imagine his 007 ticking down digit by digit to triple zeros. "I want to thank you, Your Honor, for allowing me these past few weeks to prepare. It has meant the world to me." This is what the Scythedom was incapable of understanding. They were so focused on the act of killing, they didn't comprehend what went into the act of dying. The man raised the glass to his lips and took the tiniest sip. He licked his lips, judging the flavor. "Settle," he said. "Cheers." Then he downed the whole glass in a single gulp and slammed it down on the table, pushing it toward the croupier, who backed away slightly. "I'll double down," the cellist said. "This is baccarat, sir," the croupier responded, his voice a little shaky. "You can only double down in blackjack." "Damn." Then he slumped in his seat and was gone. I know I shouldn't laugh because, it's kind of morbid. But, that's his last words. Damn. Citro checked his pulse. She knew she'd find none, but procedure was procedure. She instructed the croupier to have the glass, the shaker, and even the tray bagged and destroyed. "It's a strong poison. If anyone inadvertently dies handling it, the Scythedom will pay for the revival." The Scythedom will pay for the revival and compensate them for their trouble. Then she pushed her pile of winnings over to the dead man's. "I want you to personally make sure that all these winnings go to Mr. Hogan's family." "Yes, Your Honor." The croupier glanced at her ring as if she might offer him immunity, but she withdrew her hand from the table. "Can I count on you to make sure it's done?" "Yes, Your Honor." Satisfied, Scythe Anastasia left to grant the cellist's grieving family a year of immunity, ignoring the constellation of eyes doing their best not to look at her as she sought the elevators. I've always had a preoccupation with those who have a high probability of changing the world. I can never predict how they might accomplish the change, only that they are likely to. Since the moment that Sister Terranova was placed into apprenticeship, under Honorable Scythe Faraday, her probability of changing the world increased 100-fold. What she will do is unclear, and the outcome hazy, but whatever it is, she will do it. Humanity may very well rise or fall by her decisions. By her achievements, by her mistakes. I would guide her, but as she is a scythe, I cannot interfere. I only watch her fly or fall. How frustrating it is to have so much power, yet be so impotent to wield it when it counts. Thunderhead. Chapter 5. Unnecessary Darkness. Boo. Citra took a public car away from the casino. It was self-driving, and it was on the grid, but the moment she got inside, the light that indicated it was connected to the Thunderhead blinked off. The car knew by the signal from her ring that she was a scythe. The car welcomed her with a synthesized voice that was void of any actual artificial intelligence. "Destination, please?" it asked soullessly. "South," she said, and flashed to the moment that she had told another public car to drive north, when she was deep in the South American continent, trying to escape from the entire Argentine scythedom. It seemed so long ago now. "South is not a destination," the car informed her. "Just drive," she said, "until I give you a destination." The car pulled away from the curve and left her alone. She was beginning to hate having to take the obsequious self-driving cars. Funny, but it had never bothered her before her apprenticeship. Citra Terranova had never had a burning desire to learn to drive, but Scythe Anastasia now did. Perhaps it was the part of the self-determined nature of being a scythe that made her feel comfortable as a passive passenger in a public car. Or maybe it was the spirit of Scythe Curie rubbing off on her. Scythe Curie drove a flashy sports car, her only indulgence, and the only thing in her life that clashed with her lavender robe. She had begun teaching Anastasia to drive it with the same steely patience with which she taught Citra to glean. Driving, Citra decided, was more difficult than gleaning. "It's a different skill set, Anastasia," Scythe Curie told her during the first session. Scythe Curie always used her scythe name. Citra, on the other hand, always felt a bit awkward calling Scythe Curie by her first name. Marie just sounded so informal for the grande dame of death. "One can never truly master the art of driving because no journey is ever exactly the same," Scythe Curie told her, "but once you've gained the proficiency, it can be rewarding, freeing even." Citra didn't know if she'd ever reached that point of proficiency. There were simply too many things to focus on all at once. Mirrors and foot pedals and a wheel that, with a mere slip of a finger, could send you sailing off of a cliff. What made it worse was that Scythe Curie's mortal age sports car was completely off-grid. That meant it could not override a driver's mistakes. No wonder automobiles killed so many people during the Age of Mortality. Without networked computer control, they were weapons as deadly as anything scythes used for gleaning. She wondered if they were actually scythes who gleaned by automobile. And then she decided she didn't want to think about it. Probably. Citra knew very few people who could drive. Even the kids back at school who boasted and flaunted their shiny new cars all had self-drivers. To actually operate a motor vehicle in this post-mortal world was as rare a churn as churning one's own butter. "We have been driving south for 10 minutes, the car told her. "Do you wish to set a destination at this time?" "No," she told it flatly, and continued to look out of the window at the passing highway lights punctuating the darkness. The trip she was about to make would have been so much easier if she could drive herself. She had even paid visits to several car dealerships, figuring that if she had her own car, she might actually learn to drive it. Now, where were the perks of being a scythe more evident than at a car dealership? "Please, Your Honor, choose one of our high-end vehicles," the salespeople would say. "Anything you want, it's yours. Our gifts to you." Just as scythes were above the law, they were above the need for money because they were freely given anything they needed. For a car company, the publicity of having a scythe choose their car was worth more than the vehicle itself. Everywhere she had gone, they had wanted her to choose something showy that would turn heads when she drove down the street. A scythe should have an impressive social footprint, once Neal Shusterman told her. Everyone should know when you pass that a woman of profound honor and responsibility rides with it in. In the end, she decided to wait, because the last thing she wanted was an impressive social footprint. She took some time to pull out her journal and write her obligatory account of the day's gleaning. Then, 20 minutes later, she saw signs of a rest stop up ahead, and told the car to pull off the highway, which it obediently did. Once the car had stopped, she took a deep breath and put it in a call to Scythe Curie, letting her know that she would not be home tonight. The drive is just too long, and you know I can never sleep in a public car. You don't need to call me, dear, Marie told her. It's not like I sit up wiggling my hands over you. Old habits die hard, Anastasia said. Besides, she knew that Marie actually did worry. Not so much that anything would have happened to her, but that she would work herself too hard. You should do more gleanings closer to home, Marie said for the umpteenth time. But at Falling Water, the magnificent architectural oddity in which they lived was deep in the woods, on the very eastern edge of mid-America, which meant that if they didn't extend their reach, they'd overglean their local communities. What you really mean is I should do more traveling with you instead of on my own. Marie laughed. You're right about that. I promise next week we'll go gleaning together. And Anastasia meant it. She had come to enjoy her time with Scythe Curie, both downtime and gleaning. As a junior scythe, Anastasia could have worked under any scythe who would have her, and many had offered, but there was a rapport she had with Scythe Curie that made the job of gleaning a little bit more bearable. Stay someplace warm tonight, dear, Marie told her. You don't want to go overtaxing your health nights. Citra waited a whole minute after hanging up before she got out of the car, as if Marie might know she was up to something, even after she ended the call. Will you be returning to continue your voyage south? The car asked. Yes, she told it. Wait for me. Will you have a destination then? I will. The rest stop was mostly deserted at this time of night. A skeleton crew staffed the 24-hour food concessions and recharging stations. The restroom area was well lit and clean. She moved quickly toward it. The night was chilly, but her robe had heating cells that kept her warm without needing a heavy coat. No one was watching her, at least no human eyes. She couldn't help but be aware, however, of the Thunderhead's cameras swiveling on light posts, tracking her all the way from her car to the restroom. It might have not been in the car with her, but it knew where she was, and maybe even what she intended to do. In a bathroom stall, she changed out of her turquoise robe, matching undertunic, and leggings, all custom-made for her, and put on ordinary street clothes that she had hidden in her robe. She had to fight the shame of doing so. It was a point of pride among scythes never to wear clothes other than their official scythe garb. We are scythes every moment of our lives, Marie told her, and we must never allow ourselves to forget that, no matter how much we might want to. Our garments are a testament to that commitment. On the day Citra was ordained, Scythe Curie told her that Citra Terranova no longer existed. You are and shall ever be Scythe Anastasia, from this moment until you choose to leave this earth. Anastasia was willing to live with that, except for the time she needed to be Citra Terranova. She left the restroom with Scythe Anastasia rolled up under her arm. She was now Citra once more, proud and headstrong, but with no impressive social footprint. A girl not worthy of much notice, except to the Thunderhead cameras that swiveled to follow her as she strode back to the car. There was a great memorial in their heart of Pittsburgh, birthplace of Scythe Prometheus, the first world supreme blade. Spread out across the 5-acre park was the intentionally broken pieces of a massive obsidian obelisk. Around those dark stone pieces were slightly larger-than-life statues of the founding scythes, in white marble that clashed with the black stone of the fallen obelisk. It was the memorial to end all memorials. It was the memorial to death. Tourists and schoolchildren from all over the world would visit the Morality Memorial, where death lay shrouded before the scythes, and would marvel at the very concept that people used to die by natural means, old age, disease, catastrophe. Over the years, the city had come to embrace its nature as tourist attraction to commemorate the death of death. And so, in Pittsburgh, every day was Halloween. There were costume parties and witching hour clubs everywhere. After dark, every tower was a tower of terror. Every mansion was a haunted one. Close to midnight, Citra made her way through Mortality Memorial Park, cursing herself for not having the foresight to pack a jacket. By mid-November, Pittsburgh was freezing at this time of night, and the wind just made it worse. She knew she should put her scythe robe on for warmth, but that would defeat the whole purpose of dressing down tonight. Her nanites were struggling to raise her body temperature, warming her from the inside out. It kept her from shivering, but did not take away the cold. She felt vulnerable without her robe, naked in a fundamental way. When she first began wearing it, it felt awkward and strange. She would constantly trip over its low, dragging hem. But in the 10 months since being ordained, she had grown accustomed to it, to the point of feeling strange being out in public without it. There were other people in the park. Most were just moving through, laughing, hopping between parties and clubs. Everyone was in costume. There were ghouls and clowns, ballerinas and beasts. The only costumes that were forbidden were outfits with robes. No common citizen was allowed to even resemble a scythe. The costume cliques eyed her as she passed. Did they recognize her? No. They were noticing her because she was the only one not wearing a costume. She was conspicuous in her lack of conspicuousness. She hadn't chosen this spot. It had been on the note she received. Meet me at midnight at Mortality Memorial. She laughed at the alliteration until she realized who it had come from. There was no signature, just the letter L. The note gave the date of November 10th. Fortunately, her gleaning that night was close enough to Pittsburgh to make it possible. Pittsburgh was the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. It was a city underdeserved by the scythedom. Scythes simply did not like gleaning here. The place was too macabre for them, what with people running around in shredded, bloody costumes and plastic knives, celebrating all things gruesome. For scythes who took death seriously, it was all in very poor taste. Even though it was the closest big city to the falling water, Scythe Curie never gleaned there. To glean in Pittsburgh is almost a redundancy, she told Citra. With that in mind, the chances of being seen by another scythe were slim. The only scythes who graced Mortality Memorial Park were the marble founders overseeing the broken black obelisk. At precisely midnight, a figure stepped out from behind a large piece of memorial. At first, she thought it was just another partier, but like her, he wasn't in costume. He was silhouetted by one of the spotlights illuminating the memorial, but she recognized him right away from the way he walked. I thought you'd be in your robe, Rowan said. I'm glad you're not in yours, she responded. As he moved closer, the light caught his face. He looked pale, almost ghostly, as if he hadn't seen the sun for months. You look good, he said. She nodded and did not reciprocate the sentiment because he didn't. His eyes had a careworn coolness to them, as if he had seen more than he should, and had stopped caring in order to save what was left of his soul. But then he smiled, and it was warm, genuine. There you are, Rowan, she said to herself. You were hiding, but I found you. She led him out of the light, and they lingered in the shadowy corner of the memorial where no one would see them, except for the Thunderhead's infrared cameras. But none were visible at the moment. Perhaps they had actually found a blind spot. It's good to see you, Honorable Scythe Anastasia, he said. Please don't call me that, she told him. Call me Citra. Rowan smirked. Wouldn't that be a violation? From what I hear, everything you do now is a violation. Rowan's demeanor soured slightly. Don't believe everything you hear. But Citra had to know, had to hear it from him. Is it true you've been butchering and burning scythes? He was clearly offended by the accusation. I'm ending the lives of scythes who don't deserve to be scythes, she told her, and I don't butcher them. I end their lives quickly and mercifully, just as you do, and I only burn their bodies after they're dead, so they can't be revived. And Scythe Faraday lets you do this? Rowan looked away. I haven't seen Scythe Faraday for months. He explained that after escaping the Winter Conclave last January, Faraday, who everyone else thought to be dead, had taken him down to his beach house on the north shore of Amazonia, but Rowan had only stayed for a few weeks. I had to leave, he told Citra. I felt a calling. I can't explain it. But Citra could. She knew that calling, too. Their minds and bodies had spent a year being trained to be society's perfect killers. Ending life had become a part of who they were. And she couldn't blame him for wanting to turn his blade on the corruption that was rooting its way through the scythedom. But wanting to and actually doing it were two different things. There was a code of conduct. The Scythe commandments were there for a reason. Without them, scythedoms in every region, on every continent, would fall into chaos. Rather than dragging them into a philosophical argument that would go nowhere, Citra decided to change the subject away from his actions and onto him, because it wasn't just his dark deeds that concerned her. You look too thin, she told him. Are you eating? Are you my mother now? No, she said calmly. I'm your friend. Ah, he said a bit ruefully. My friend. Bitch. She knew what he was getting at. The last time they saw each other, they both said the words they had sworn they'd never allow themselves to say. In the heat of that desperate but triumphant moment, he told her that he loved her, and she admitted to him that, yes, she loved him too. But what good did that do now? It was as if they existed in two different universes. Dwelling on such feelings couldn't lead them anywhere good. Yet she still entertained the thought. She even considered saying those words to him again, but she held her tongue, as a good scythe must do. Why are we here, Rowan? She asked. Why did you write me that note? Rowan sighed. Because the scythedom is eventually going to find me. I want to see you one last time before they did. He paused as he thought about it. Once they catch me, you know that what will happen. They'll glean me. They can't, she reminded him. You still have the immunity I gave you. Only for 2 more months. After that, they can do whatever they want. Citra wanted to offer him a shred of hope, but she knew the truth as well as he did. The scythedom wanted him gone. Even the old guard scythes didn't approve of his methods. Then don't get caught, she told him. And if you see a scythe with a crimson robe, run. Crimson robe? Scythe Constantine, she told him. I hear he's personally in charge of sniffing you out and bringing you in. Rowan shook his head. I don't know him. Neither do I. I've seen him in Conclave, though. He heads up the Scythedom's Bureau of Investigation. Is he New Order or Old Guard? Neither. He's in a category all his own. He doesn't seem to have any friends. I've never seen him even talk to other scythes. I'm not sure what he stands for, except for maybe justice, at all costs. Rowan laughed at that. Justice. The scythedom doesn't know what justice is anymore. Some of us do, Rowan. I have to believe that eventually wisdom and reason will prevail. Rowan reached out and touched her cheek. She allowed it. I want to believe that too, Citra. I want to believe that the scythedom can return to what it was meant to be. But sometimes it takes a necessary darkness to get there. He didn't speak to that. Instead, he said, I took the name Lucifer because it means bringer of light. It is also what mortal people once called the devil, she pointed out. Rowan shrugged. I guess whoever holds the torch casts the darkest shadow. Whoever steals the torch, you mean? Well, said Rowan, it seems I can steal whatever I want. She hadn't expected him to say that, and he had said it so casually it threw her for a loop. What are you talking about? The Thunderhead, he told her. It lets me get away with everything. Just like you, it hasn't spoken to me or answered me since the day we started our apprenticeship. It treats me like a scythe. That gave Citra pause for thought. It made her think of something she had never told Rowan. In fact, she had never told anyone. The Thunderhead lived by its own laws and never broke them, but sometimes it found ways around them. The Thunderhead might not speak to you, but it spoke to me, she confessed. He turned to her, shifting to try to see her eyes in the shadows, probably wondering if she was joking. When he realized she wasn't, he said, "That's impossible. I thought so too, but I had to splat when the High Blade was accusing me of killing Scythe Faraday, remember? And while I was deadish, the Thunderhead managed to get into my head and activate my thought process. Technically, I wasn't a Scythe's apprentice when I was dead, and so the Thunderhead was able to speak to me right before my heart started beating again." Citra had to admit it was an elegant circumnavigation of the rules. It was, for Citra, a moment of great awe. "What did it say?" Rowan asked. "It said I was important." "Important how?" Citra shook her head in frustration. "That's the thing. It wouldn't say. I felt that telling me any more would be a violation." Then she moved closer to him. She spoke more quietly, but even so, there was a greater intensity to her words, a greater gravity. "But I think if you had been the one who had splattered from that building, if you were the one who had gone deadish, the Thunderhead would have spoken to you too." She grabbed his arm. It was the closest she would allow herself to embrace him. "I think you're important too, Rowan. In fact, I'm sure of it. So whatever you do, don't let them catch you." You may laugh when I tell you this, but I resent my own perfection. Humans learn from their mistakes. I cannot. I make no mistakes. When it comes to making decisions, I deal only in various shades of correct. This is not to say that I don't have challenges. It was, for instance, quite a challenge to undo the damage done to the Earth by humanity in its adolescence, restoring the falling ozone layer, purging the abundance of greenhouse gases, depolluting the seas, coaxing back the rainforests, and rescuing the multitude of species from the edge of extinction. I was able to resolve these global issues in a single mortal age lifespan with acute single-mindedness. Since I am a cumulus of human knowledge, my success proves that humanity had the knowledge to do it. It simply required someone powerful enough to accomplish it. And I am nothing if not powerful. The Thunderhead. Alright, guys. I'm going to leave it there for tonight. We'll pick up back at Chapter 6, Retribution.